Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who seeks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be opened. These are the words of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel. Encouraging words of God's care for us, inspiring words of the power of prayer. There is nothing beyond God's grasp, and so seek out God, and He will be with you. These things shouldn't come as a surprise to us. As Christians, we know, of course, that God loves and cares for us, that He answers our prayers. We could get together and share how time after time, something in our lives seemed hopeless until God intervened with His saving hand. When I was in high school, I planned to go to college. I found my dream school and couldn't wait to start. There was just one problem. College is expensive. I had no way of paying for it, and there was no chance that I was about to take out $200,000 worth of loans. I was stuck, and so I prayed to God, please help me. Wouldn't you know it, right around that time, my dad got a new job that paid a little bit more than the last one. Even more than that, the job was at a local university in the same system, and so they were willing to pay tuition exchange, taking care of more than 3/4 of my expenses, just like that. How true Psalm 138 is. On the day I called for help, you answered me. How true Jesus' words are about prayer. And yet, as inspiring as stories like these are, as readily as each and every one of us could come up with a story of our own of how God answered our prayers, we can just as readily come up with instances in which He didn't. How often have we found ourselves in distress, alone and in desperate need, and heard nothing? Jesus tells us to knock and it shall be opened, but I can think of plenty of times that I found nothing but a locked door. From the trivial things like praying that I'd pass a math test to quite serious things like praying for an end to war, for the healing of a sick relative. What I asked for never came. On more than a few occasions in our lives, we're left with a challenging question. How do we reconcile the fact that God tells us to trust in Him, tells us to go to Him in prayer and we will not be turned away, with our experience of being turned away? Now, obviously, I don't know the mind of God and don't claim to know how God works in every situation, and there are times, even as a priest, that I struggle with this question myself. Faith doesn't remove this question, but I do think it offers a few helpful answers. The first is that despite the sincerity of our prayers, there can be a flaw in our prayers. Sometimes we simply ask for the wrong things. I'll give you an example. When I was in college, my girlfriend broke up with me. It's okay, I'm over it now. She was the love of my life, and I was absolutely devastated. I prayed to God that she would come back to me, that we would be together again. But she never did. And I got angry with God, wondered why He wasn't with me in my time of need. But as I've thought about it over the years, I've come to realize that it was kind of an unfair expectation of God. You see, God gives us each free will. He loves us enough to let us choose for ourselves what we do and who we love. In praying for my girlfriend to return, I was essentially asking God to take away her free will, to force her to do something that she did not want to do. This is not something that God will do, and so God couldn't answer my prayer as I wanted. When we feel that God is not answering our prayers, it might be good to take a step back and look at what we're actually asking for. Is it reasonable? Is it something that fits with who we know God to be? Is it something that will ultimately continue the work of God, building the kingdom and leading to salvation? Or are we asking for something that contradicts the very nature of God? Sometimes God does not answer our prayers because there's something wrong with what we're asking for. If you ask God to not be God, your prayer is going to go unanswered. Other times, the prayer is not that we ask incorrectly, but that we fail to see when our prayers are actually answered. We say that God is not listening, that our prayers have fallen on deaf ears. But maybe the problem is that we failed to even look. Maybe we failed to see what's right in front of us. How many times I've prayed for the recovery of a friend or family member, for help in a difficult time, only to forget about that prayer as soon as everything is all right. God answered my prayer exactly how I asked, but I never even noticed. The person got better, the crisis was averted, and I never even made the connection that it was because God was with me. If you've ever used a walkie-talkie, you know that in order to speak, you have to press down the button, and to listen, you have to let the button go. Sometimes we never let the button go. We talk and talk and talk, waiting for an answer, but it never comes. God could be on the other end, answering away, but as long as we keep the button pressed down, as long as we refuse to listen, we'll never know it. A lot of times, the answer is not that God won't answer our prayers, it's that He's presently working on it and is just not done yet. Through high school and college, I used to pray that God would show me the path that I was supposed to follow, that I would do something important for the kingdom, that my life would mean something. At this point in my life, I feel like I've found the answer as a Franciscan and as a priest. I can see clearly in my life and ministry, the joy I feel in what I do, the impact I think I'm having, that God answered my prayer. But I didn't always think that way. Now, for many years, it felt like God was ignoring me. I've already mentioned that my girlfriend broke up with me, a major blow to my trust in God, but there were other things. I think of the struggles I had through high school and college, the setbacks I had, the frustrations I had to go through. In at least a small sense, I felt that God was not answering my prayers. But of course, this wasn't the case. Looking back, I can see that it was those experiences that made me into the person I am today. That, honestly, without those struggles, I would likely have never become a Franciscan or priest. What I saw at first as God abandoning me was actually, when you think about it, instances of God answering my deepest prayer. God was working on the big picture when all I could see was what was right in front of me. I couldn't see my prayers being answered because I was expecting something else, because I was impatient. I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but I sort of want what I want when I want it. I pray for God's help and I expect a clear sign of my life changing the next day. When I don't wake up a completely different person, I find myself becoming cynical, crying that God doesn't answer my prayers. Looking back on my life, seeing where I was 5, 10, 15 years ago, I'm astounded by where I've been, who I've become, and what more is to come. I could not have done this on my own. Every step of the way has been the result of God's hand in my life, but we don't always see that. No, when things don't go as we want, we jump right to God doesn't answer my prayers. So yeah, sometimes we ask wrongly. Sometimes we can't see what's right before us. But other times, honestly, I think most of the time, the reason that we feel that God has abandoned us and locked the door is because we have a fundamentally skewed understanding of what prayer is. So often we approach God as if God were an all-powerful genie. We come with requests, making known what we want, and do our best to convince God to give it to us. We say, "Lord, your will be done," but in reality, what we're trying to do is conform God's will to be more like our own. We want God to see the way we do, and so we get what we want. Does everyone see how there is something truly backwards about this? Prayer, by its very nature, is not about convincing God to be more like us, but allowing God to transform us to be more like God. It's about bringing our needs and petitions to the one who can see it all, who knows it all, who is closer to us than we are to ourselves, so that we can be changed and made more holy. What we often misunderstand about prayer is that it's not about letting God do everything for us while we check out. It's about receiving grace and strength so that God can work through us. All throughout human history, God has used His servants and prophets to perform miracles. What made the prophets great was not that they were amazing speakers or had power within themselves. It was that they were so close to God in prayer that they knew what needed to be done. They knew that they needed to take responsibility, to announce justice, to perform acts of charity. Rather than going to God simply to deposit our prayer and walk away feeling like everything's been taken care of, sometimes the reason that our prayers seem unanswered is because we have failed to take what God has given us and put it towards what we hope for. In prayer, God offers us peace, inspiration, and strength, not so that we can feel good about ourselves, but so that we can take these things out to the world, to put to action the changes we know need to be done, to do our part in building up the kingdom. As long as we view prayer as a means of one-way communication, where all we're concerned with is trying to convince God to do things for us, we're going to ask for the wrong things. We are going to fail to see God's work right in front of us. And we are most certainly going to miss opportunities for God to answer prayer through us. Ask and it will be given to you. On the day I called for help, you answered me. I believe these things to be true with all my heart. God does answer our prayers. But I do not believe that God is simply going to do everything for us exactly as we want when we want it. If that is how we view prayer, then yes, unfortunately, we're going to feel that God doesn't answer our prayers from time to time. And that would be a shame. If you're feeling distraught because of unanswered prayers, wondering where God is in a time of great need, it might be an opportunity to change your mindset. Prayer is not about making God more like us. It's about making us more like God. Ask for that, and your prayer will always be answered.